Welcome. In this video, we will show how business users can use data interface to develop solutions with an easy-to-use interface. Here, specifically, we'll go to Develop, and then the first thing that we will do is we'll click on Projects, and we'll give a name to this particular project for which we are creating this data interface. So here we will give a name, for example, Employee Enrollment. And then the description you can give for this project would be onboarding of employee enrollment files. And then click on Save. So the first thing that we've done is we have created a project. Now the next thing that we would do is we will go to Solutions, and then we will go to Data Interface. In the Data Interface screen, we will click on Create New, and here we would give a name to this particular data interface, for example, as Fidelity, and let's say this is a client, and then Employee Onboarding. So this would be your employee enrollment onboarding, and the description would be to onboard employee enrollment data from Fidelity. So suppose you're an insurance company, you're getting the enrollment files that you need to process from a client, and that would be a good name and description that you can provide as part of this data interface. Now the next thing that we would do is we'll go to Configure, and as part of the Configure category, you will notice there are different drop downs that would prompt you to select different categories of services from these drop downs. And what these drop downs are basically three types. The first one is related to the source. The second drop downs are related to the targets, and the very last one is related to the mapping. So the idea here in this particular section is it's asking for what type of source you're getting in terms of the data file layout. The next thing that it's going to ask is where do you want to send this data as part of your output, and what is the type of that output that you need to create. And the last thing that it will ask is the mapping. So in order to create that target output format, you need to use a mapping to translate the data of the inbound file to the output file that you need to generate and send to that output system. So this mapping will be the core of the transformation activity that will be used to translate the data from source to target. And then the next thing that you would see here is there's the deploy properties. And this particular deploy properties is asking for what type of events you want to use to kick off this data interface at runtime. So the events could be file, FTP, so your source file may be coming in through a folder or through an FTP location, and FTP supports the normal FTP, the SFTP, FTPS. The data could be coming in from a database as a change data capture type of an event. It could be a scheduled job that you want to run at a particular time. It could be coming in as an email attachment as part of the data file. And the last type of event could be a timer event where you want to run this particular interface 3 or 4 times a week or a few days, and then you want to expire the timer event. So there could be different types of events that you may want to use to kick off the data interface that you would set up here at the top. Now the next thing that we would do is we will set up the data interface by selecting the key categories from these different drop downs. So the first thing that we would select in the source is, let's suppose this particular client is sending us data files, the enrollment files, as part of their Excel data. So here we would select Excel because let's suppose the data enrollment files that are coming in are Excel files. But you would notice that as part of this drop-down, Excel is just one of the options. We also support text, which contains both the CSV file formats or any other delimited file formats for that matter. There could be fixed length data files. There could be data coming from a database tables, Excel, obviously, and then there could be multiple record types that could be coming in as part of the fixed length data here as part of this positional schema. And then the file could be XML as well. So there are different ways that we can read data, and your clients may be sending you data in different formats. And this is what this drop-down is allowing you to select that type of a file layout. So let's suppose the incoming file is in Excel. And when you select an Excel schema, or any other schema for that matter, the next field, which is the source schema name, will allow you to select any existing activity that may belong to this particular Excel schema. So for example, you may already have created an Excel schema that defines the layout or the specifications for that file. So if you have that defined already, then you can simply select from this drop-down. Since we are building everything from scratch, there's no pre-existing activity that we can select. What we're doing is we can click on New, and we'll build a new specifications for this type of file. So now the file that we are getting is an Excel file, and I have a sample file here. And this particular Excel file contains data with multiple rows, and the records that you see here have first name, last name, other types of columns, as you can see here in this Excel sheet. So this is just a sample data file. So at runtime, you may get hundreds of these types of files throughout the day or throughout the week, and you need to process these files automatically once they are located in the source folder or FTP or whatever the case may be. So here, what we would do is we will give a name. So let's suppose this is Fidelity Employee Enrollment Spec. So this could be the spec for this particular client who's going to send the data in Excel format. And a nice name and description is useful. So think about the naming convention that you can come up with. And this would be your employee enrollment spec for Fidelity. And then in this case, the data header present should be checked because there is a header row in the Excel file. And then the next option that you see here, which is the way we can define the schema, can be either using a definition file, basically it's a data file, or you can enter the field names manually here in this panel. Since we have a lot of fields and we already have a sample data file available, we can simply select that import definition file option. The data file already is selected for you, and we can click on Upload File, and we can click on Choose File, and we can select that particular file from the folder. So here we can go in and select the employee enrollment file, and we will simply click on Upload File. And once the file is uploaded in this smaller window, you will notice that it shows you how many worksheets are there, and then we can simply click on Process Sheets. And what it does is, as it toggles back and forth, and when you click on this Process Sheet button, is that it actually reads the column headers as part of the this button action that it performs. And then you click on Finish. And then once you come out of this window, you will notice that it shows you a sheet name drop down. And since there's only one sheet that is part of this data, once you select that sheet, it shows you all the field names that it has extracted from this Excel sample file. So now what this does is uh, shows you that this is the data file that it's going to read from the actual file that comes in at runtime. There are other options also available as part of the advanced properties. One of the things that you can also do here is that you can select that project that you had created earlier so that everything that you create is part of that project, and it's actually grouped as part of that project. So that's a very nice feature, so that every activity that you can create, you can link it to a particular project so that you can then go to that project page and see what's out there for that project. So here we will select that project, everything else remains same, and then we will click on save. So once you save the source schema, it shows up with that name here along with the description. So the first thing that we did is we selected the source and we defined the specifications of that source. As part of our target, we will select database. And in this case, the first thing that we will do is we'll select a database schema so that we can define the table where this data is going to be stored in. So here we will give a enrollment data capture, and this could be your database table to load enrollment data. And the reason why we have this table is that this could be your common table to store enrollment for all your clients' data. So that's why the mapping is also needed to transform the incoming to this particular common format. And then the next thing that we will do is we will create a new database connection. So let's suppose your database connection is members, and that contains your enrollment table. So we'll select the MySQL driver, and then you may have this activity already created as part of your administrator role. So here we will select localhost. We'll give a description of the database name. So here, after you give the port number, the database name is members, and then you define the user ID and password. And then you can also test the connection to make sure that everything is created successfully, and then click on save. So now what we have done is we have defined the connection to the database here, and now we can click on the browse tables to select our table where we want to load this data into. So we'll simply select that particular table called benefits that you see here. And then after you select that, click on get columns. Then you click on select all. And when you click on select all at the bottom part of the screen, it will create a SQL query which will have a select star from the benefits table syntax. And then click OK. And if you have any primary key, you can define that here so that when the database target gets executed, you may also want to choose an update operation rather than just an insert. So if there's an update operation in the database target, then you need to make sure that the primary key is defined in this field. Otherwise, it won't know which particular records to update. So here we will not define any primary key. It's a simple insert. We're simply loading the data into the target table, and then we'll click on save. So once we have defined the schema, now we are able to define our target. So here the target needs to be selected, and then the target name. If you find any pre-existing one, you can select those, but here we need to create a brand new one. We'll click on new, and here we will define our target name as employee or employee enrollment target database to store enrollment data. And then here you will select the members database connection that we created earlier. And now you will also select the enrollment data capture schema that we also created as a previous step before coming to this window. And then this is the place where you can select which database operation you need to perform, whether it's insert, update, or the combination of both insert and update. So here we'll simply select insert, and then we can also define our project as employee enrollment. So what we have done so far is we have created the database target as part of the schema as well, and we also created the source, which has the source schema name defined for that particular source type. Now the final thing that is left here is to define the mapping, so that we can transform the data from the Excel to this database common format. So in order to do that, we will click on New, and we will give a name to this particular map. So here this could be specific to this client, so Fidelity Employee Enrollment Map, and then you can say mapping rules to transform data into common format, and then you will click on the data mapper button. Once the mapping interface opens up, you will notice that the source, which is the Excel file data, shows up here on the left hand side, and then the database target schema shows up on the right hand side of the screen. And now what we can do is we can very simply map the fields, and the way you map the fields is you select record to record, and then since a lot of these fields have common names, we can right click on the target record node and select connect matching children. And when you click OK on that one, then you will notice that most of the fields have been mapped, and the ones that are not mapped, you can very simply do a one-to-one map and complete your mapping. So once the mapping is done, you can click on Save, and then we can proceed further in terms of defining the trigger for our data interface. So the final thing in the deployment part of the data interface is to select where the files will be coming from, and here we will select the file event. So there is a folder, a shared folder on the network, or it could be a local folder where Adeptia is running, where the files will be dropped for this particular client, and then we can pick up those files and translate those files and load the data into the database based on the mapping that we have defined. So now once we have selected the file event, we can look at a trigger that may be already predefined. And here you will notice there's a trigger that we have already created earlier. And let me show you what the properties of this trigger are. So we can either click on New, or you can select a pre-existing trigger like this one here. And this particular trigger was created by populating this form here. And what this form is asking for is provide the trigger name and the description, and what type of trigger you need to run against this folder. Whether you want to look for a new file that comes up every time, and then that triggers off the translation. The other option is whether you want to just pick up a file that already exists in the folder. So it's not a new file, but the file that already exists. And if the file is there and gets modified, you want to pick it up. So there are different options that you can select. And here we will simply select on file exists, because I already have a file there. We can use this to test our translation. And the file include criteria allows you to put in any type of wildcards. So here we have put in star or XLS, and you can comma separate out these file include criteria and put in multiple criteria as part of the comma separation parameters. And then the file base location is where the trigger is going to look for those new files or existing files in this case. So this is the path, and again, this path is should be accessible to where Adeptia is running. So this particular C drive is in the same machine where Adeptia is running, but it could be a absolute path, a shared path, shared network drive, as long as Adeptia has access to this particular location. And then at the bottom part of the screen, we have the polling frequency. And here I'm saying that I need to look for these files every 5 hours. And you can change the duration to minutes, seconds, depending upon your preference. And then we will simply click on Save. So this is your file trigger. Everything is set up correctly now. And then we will click on Save. So our onboarding of this particular client is completed as part of our design time setup. And you will notice that it's part of this project that we had created earlier as part of our first starting step. Now, the next thing that we will do is we will look at the runtime status of this data interface once we trigger off this translation. And the way we can do that is we can actually go to Monitor. And now we can test this data interface by triggering off the event. You can do it manually, or you can activate the trigger and let the trigger kick off the data interface automatically. So here we will go to Events and go to File. And when we go to the events and to that file event, you will see that the file event that we created earlier shows up in a separate category as part of its repository. It will tell you the name and the description. You can also look at the file event or the process flow that it's going to execute, which is the data interface process flow. And then it will also show you the project name that it belongs to and when it was last modified. So here we also have a trigger now link, and that will allow you to just simply trigger the event. So you can also activate the event, and that will kick off this data interface every time when it looks at the new file or an existing file. But in this case, since we're just testing, we're just clicking on trigger now. And to see the status of the data interface, what we can do is we can go to Monitor, we can go to Dashboard, and we can go into the data interface section. So here you will notice that the instance ran. In this case, the employee onboarding instance of the data interface got executed. It picked up this file. Remember, we put a wildcard there in the trigger, and now based on the wildcard, it figured out there's an Excel file in this folder. It picked it up, and it also will show you what time this data interface ran and what is the ultimate status of the execution, whether it translated everything correctly or not. And then the final status here that shows up as pass means that everything ran correctly. And then this is the transmission ID. So every time when we run an instance of a data interface, we auto-generate a transmission ID as part of its history. And then we can also search based on different key fields, such as file in, file out, log message, status, source file. So there are different ways we can also search this data interface dashboard. As multiple interfaces are running, you need a simple way to search and look at the different status or to see whether you received a file that you were expecting from the client today or not. So you have the ability to search. You can also use the calendar to search back in history. So there's a lot of capability here. So this is the overall example of how a non-technical user, a business user who understands the data, who is interacting with their client can set up an onboarding process very easily and very quickly using the data interface functionality of the Adeptia suite. And then the one final thing that I also want to show you is that under the projects, when we go into the employee enrollment, all the different activities that we created as part of this data interface, starting from the Excel type of the source file coming in, what is the database target that we created to load the data into, what schema we use for the database to select which table we want to load the data into, and then the actual data interface that we created for this particular client, Fidelity. So everything that you create as part of the project is available, and through the single page you have access to all the information you need to know about that particular project. If you have any questions, please contact us at sales@adeptia.com. This concludes the demo. Thank you and goodbye.